Nobody wants to release anything competitive in theaters the week after an Avengers movie comes out, so here's a review of a documentary about a failed 80s video game peripheral currently touring the independent film festival circuit. Yeah, I don't know what happens to the ecosystem of my industry when they stop making those either. Then again, it's a Disney thing, so I mean, I'm sure there was someone in the 1950s with that version of my job around when Sleeping Beauty came along going, hey, they gotta run out of fairy tale cartoons at some point, don't they? It would vastly be overstating the case to say that I got the 21st century that I wanted. But it's definitely true that there are worse things than living in a popular culture where your particular happy place nostalgia buttons currently have a stranglehold on the collective psyche. And yet, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't becoming tired of how shallow a lot of the retro appreciation scene is. Yeah, I had a couple fun hours with Ready Player One, but if we're going to surround ourselves with Gen X and millennial dork ephemera so completely, the experience should be more substantive than just mutually co-signing, hey, remember VR Troopers? That was awesome. Hey, remember Dexter's Lab? That was awesome. Hey, remember The Last Starfighter? That was awesome. The Last Starfighter was pretty awesome, though. Point being, yes, as obvious a mark as I may be for a documentary about the absurd history of the Power Glove, a barely functional Nintendo controller from the 80s that was a pop culture phenomenon for about a year and then vanished into garage sale infamy because it didn't really work, only to be revolved as a nostalgia curiosity item in recent years, but I'd be the first to also hope there'd be more to it than a bunch of my fellow pushing 40 Nintendo-stalgic dorks being wistful about nostalgia for how much we miss 1989. Fortunately, there is. Smuggled inside what might look ostensibly like an easy appeal to the sense memory of Generation NES is a basic yet still fairly vital work of niche culture archaeology for the late 20th century tech world, which uses the generational pop infamy of the Power Glove as a jumping off point to explore not only its post-release second life as a repurposed symbol of ironic nerd cultural signification, but the much more interesting story of how hundreds of thousands of dollars in once top secret NASA research into gesture control morphed into a hobbyist tool for electronic music pioneers and high-minded early adopter VR visionaries, and eventually into something a Mattel executive thought could be turned into a consumer toy to interface with Nintendo games. Obviously, this is all more interesting if you're invested yourself in one or more of those things specifically, but even if not, seeing the way these things all intersect is pretty damn interesting overall, especially as we watch these people for whom the Power Glove or its component functions were maybe a few months or a year of work at their day-to-day jobs that they never expected to be something they'd be questioned about later on. The segment's featuring what we'd now call the marketing street team and the director of the famously bizarre Nintendo marketing movie The Wizard, which, if you'd never seen it, was basically a kid-centric remake of Rain Man that was also a video game commercial, are especially poignant in some parts. Like I said, I'm glad this isn't only a nostalgia soak, but I'm also glad it's enough of one to throw in stuff like extended clips from Video Power and the Thor song from Rock and Roll Nightmare. There's also some bittersweet business once the actual Power Glove stuff enters the story, and it becomes about how the toy executives mismanaged the launch of something that could have actually worked and instead wound up with a compromise that was more about marketing than the end result. Especially when we meet people like the software designer who was working so hard to make games that actually made use of the glove itself, only to see just one of them make it to shelves because they rushed the rest of the product out to make a deadline, or the poor guy with the absurd task of playing every already existing NES game in order to figure out ways to make the Power Glove sort of work with them. And it's almost heartbreaking to see a prototype video for a PC-enabled Power Glove 2.0 that looked like it might have really reshaped PC gaming and early web browsing if it hadn't been cancelled. But then the subsequent revelation that the Glove's failure ends up inadvertently kickstarting the nascent independent VR homebrew scene by flooding secondary markets with affordable, easily hacked motion gloves is pretty fascinating and even uplifting. I did find myself wishing that the story was told more sequentially. The doc jumps around a lot in time depending on who's telling the story and when, though I imagine that's unavoidable given that the glove needs to remain at the center of things, but the Power Glove moment was maybe a 6-month period in the middle of what turns out to be a story spanning several decades. Still, it's an interesting, compelling, fun, and even a little bit hopeful look at a subject that even I thought I'd never be this interested in, and yes, I did think about going out and trying to get one so I could wear it for this review. I'm still gonna need to find one. In any case, 3 stars, absolutely worth checking out.